If it comes to that, either the United States being taken from without or from within, that we're prepared. Are we going to stand up and stand out? Are we going to be faithful to Christ in the face of evil? Or are we going to cower and placate, as I believe probably many will? Our resolve is that I will follow Jesus. I don't know that we knew the fullness, I certainly didn't, of what that really meant.
Have you ever in the span of your life wanted a do-over? Have you ever wanted to start over? Through Yeshua, God made and empowered a new man with a new identity, a new mission, a new purpose, a new goal, and new giftings. Tune in with our host, Rolland Wright, as we explore a new model, a new way of living, Ekklesia.
Well, welcome to another edition of Regenesis. My name is Rolland Wright. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And we're going to talk about a pretty substantial, intense topic today. And I viewed a couple films recently and have read a couple books about men's lives that I want to focus on this morning, and not so much to, give them the limelight, but to encourage you to reflect about what they actually did and how they did it and why they did it, and that I believe there's a message here for us in this day, particularly where we are at war, that nations are at war, and that there is really a war within. There's war without and war within. And so I want to talk to you this morning about two men particularly, and their movies and the books about them, but really more about who they were, and that they were disciples of Jesus, and they counted the cost, and they stood up and stood out. And if you have recently heard our new op-ed, that's my latest one. In fact, it'll come out this Friday. So right after this one, this will be coming out Thursday. So similar topics. When the time comes, are you going to be willing to stand up and stand out? Who are the two men that I'm talking about today? One of them is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I hope you're familiar with these names. If you're not familiar with these names, I hope you take the time to watch the movies and that you and/or books, and that you study their lives a bit. Okay. The other man's name is Richard Wurmbrand. I'm sure I'm not quite saying that correctly, but I hope you get. Who are they? Well, both of them were pastors, ministers of the word. Their lives were influenced by the gospel. And they both lived in somewhat close proximity of time. One was in Germany, and the other was in Romania. And both of them stood up to the forces that were taking over their country. The Nazis were taking over Germany, and in several ways, and the Russians were taking over Romania. What's interesting to me is that there's some similarities in that when a dictator comes in and rises to power and takes over a country, that they not only are winning the hearts of the people and doing other things in the society, but they're against several people. One is Christians. And in both situations, the state or the church became the state church. And Bonhoeffer became known as the man who called the true church, those that were loyal to Christ and not to the Nazi regime, he called them the confessing church. And Wurmbrand, he called it the underground church. It wasn't visible. They couldn't worship known out in public because they would be arrested. And in fact, in both men's lives, they were arrested and confined to prison. And one ended up being killed in prison. The other one severely beaten and on a couple occasions was in prison. I think his was, Richard's was 14 years in prison, and his wife was imprisoned as well. The fascinating thing that I saw in the Wurmbrands was that they both chose, because of their faith, to be able to strike the difference between the people, the military soldiers that were incarcerating them, and love them in spite of the ways they were beaten, the number of ways they were tortured. And the other thing that impressed me about particularly Richard was that not only did he love them, and not only did he stand up, but he didn't give in. He wouldn't tell on the other people, who was in his congregation, who his followers were, if you want to use that term. So what I want us to look at is that there are men called disciples of Jesus, of Yeshua, that followed him, particularly post-resurrection, ascension into heaven, and the giving of the Holy Spirit. Peter preached a message that was incredibly powerful, and many were won to Christ through that preaching that particular day. But almost to a man of the disciples, or the original apostles, or even if, I include Paul, all of them to a man, except for the one that took his life prior to Christ's crucifixion, and John, who was exiled, gave their lives. They were martyred. I know there's a modern theology that's being promoted out there about end times, and the reason I want to share what I'm sharing today is that I want to prepare you. If it comes to that, either the United States being taken from without or from within, that we're prepared. Are we going to stand up and stand out, or are we and be, our allegiance? Are we going to be faithful to Christ in the face of evil, or are we going to cower and placate, and as I believe probably many will? Are we going to already know our resolve is that I will follow Jesus? There was a song that we used to sing as youth, I can remember. I will follow Jesus. Come what may, I will follow him. I don't know that we knew the fullness, I certainly didn't, of what that really meant. In one of the books, the one with about Bonhoeffer, he wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship. I remember reading it, or trying to read it. I didn't complete it when I was right about 20 years old. Received a copy. In there, he is quoted as saying, "From the moment of following Christ, he bids you come and die. Are we prepared for what the cost might be?" A couple places you can find the book. I had read a book that Eric McTaxis wrote called Seven Men. And I have a copy here. I don't know if it's showing correctly. And the secret of their greatness. One of the men in there is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Richard Wurmbrand, just to share a little bit more about his story. After he had been incarcerated twice, that equaled 14 years, I believe, he was encouraged by his congregation and people in Romania to flee, to run. He had the opportunity, and they convinced him, and he left. He didn't want to. It's interesting that Dietrich, on the other hand, he was in the United States when war broke out, and he knew and understood what was going on, and he couldn't stay and not be a part. And he went back, if you will, into the fire. He went to rescue people. And part of his story is that he was incarcerated because he not only took a vocal public position against the Nazi regime, he was actually part of a resistance movement that attempted to assassinate Hitler. Wherever you lie on that, the important thing is that knowing what we would do in same circumstance, as the resolve. My understanding is that, and if somebody knows this hurts, I attended a conference shortly after Columbine happened, if you remember that. In Colorado, I think there was 2 young men involved there, but the testimony I heard was that they went around to different students and asked them if they believed in God. I don't know if or Jesus. And if they said yes, they pulled the trigger. Would we, in same circumstance, would we stand up and be faithful, or would we deny Christ? Heavy topic. Heavy topic. So Bonhoeffer called his the confessing church. Wurmbrand, it was the underground church. The underground church. Both resisted the state church. I remember too, I just feel like there's some fortuitous, and I call them now today God appointments that I had even years ago. I went to school in Southern California, and it was near Disneyland. And at Disneyland at that time, and this was the late 70s or right at 80, I think it was prior, there was an exhibit that was Abraham Lincoln, the early robotics, that he actually stood up and addressed the audience. And I'll never forget, I obviously didn't have the impact at the moment, but it has the impact that has lasted all these years. I mean, that's over 40 years ago. But I'll never forget, in his closing statements, one of the things that he said was, the United States will never be taken without. It will only be taken within. And we really see that today, folks. If you don't, if you're not awake, you're not seeing it, and much of it is a political ideology mixed with people that are acting out. I believe some of the things that we're having happen right now in fires and in mass killings and so forth is at the hand of the country that we're at war with right now. Okay? There's been articles that I've seen about the grid and it being hacked and attacked, and I believe that's the same source. But we need to understand while it's being acted out here, it's being orchestrated up there. There is an evil one that's pulling the strings. If you don't recognize the face of chaos, what's his MO in Scripture? Kill, steal, and destroy. And the chaos that he creates, it comes back to him. Okay? Come on. So I just want to leave you with those thoughts. I want to encourage you to take a look at the movie. I believe it's called Bonhoeffer. We got it because we're Prime members, and it's available. And we also watched the Tortured for Christ, Wurmbrand. And I had read the book last week and saw it just this past week. Timely. So that's my message today. That's my call. Determine today your allegiance. Determine today your conviction. Are you going to be one that stands up and stands out and speaks against evil? Or are you going to go along with the crowd? Go along with the culture? I took a look at the book of Daniel this past week, too. And there was 3 young men along with Daniel that stood up to the culture of their day, which was Babylonian, which is, ironically, I hope you see a connection there. They stood up and stood out against. They wouldn't bow down to the idol that Nebuchadnezzar had made. But it's interesting that not only were they brought through the fire and that he saw a 4th image, a 4th person in the fire with the young men, but we also see the picture of a Daniel that was protected and spared from the lion's den. And at the conclusion of that, what's fascinating is that there's a recorded quote from the king Nebuchadnezzar. And basically it was, this is the true God. I hope you understand, too, the connection from New Testament to Old Testament, that it's the same God. That's the English term we've put for it. In Hebrew, it's Adonai. There is only one. Only one. Only one. I had the privilege of attending a chapel. I think I've referenced this before while I was at Biola. I believe the name of the person that was speaking was Hansi. I believe that's the correct name, but if that's not correct, and this would have been right about 1980. And I'll never forget, again, another, just like the Disneyland experience. I don't remember her story. I know she was a Holocaust survivor, but her closing comment was, I hope you're right. She didn't challenge our theology. I was of that left behind mentality then because that's all I had really been told. Read the scriptures. Listen to these movies. What makes us think that we're exempt? Many people, many cultures that have died at the hands of Christians, that have died at the hands of dictators. Many. China, Romania, the killing fields, Cambodia, Russia, Germany. There's many examples. So I encourage you to look at the movies, pray into it, and say, reveal to me, I want to know. I want more of you. Thank you for listening. God bless.